Conference. It's great to be back here in Brighton. And to be frank, it's great to be here at all. When I got knocked off my bike by a black cab in July, I was lying in a gutter near Westminster Central Hall after my head had crashed into the pavement and my life was flashing before my eyes. On which note, I'd say, incidentally, don't knock it till you tried it. There were a couple of moments from my youth that I'd forgotten about where I thought, ooh, blimey, that was fun. And it wasn't running through fields of wheat, comrades. But of course, I then had the wonderful NHS paramedics coming to my aid. And they did the standard questions that they always do to test if you're suffering from a serious head injury. And dazed as I was, I got through it. What day is it? Friday. How many fingers am I holding up? 2. But when they got to who's the Prime Minister, I had to say, guys, I think you're going to have to take me to hospital because for some reason I think it's Boris Johnson. Because conference, you know, I've seen Boris Johnson up close. Not close up like a lot of other women, thank goodness. But I shadowed him for the entire 2 years that he was Foreign Secretary, his only ministerial position before this one. And in my entire time in Parliament, I have never shadowed anyone so lazy, so incompetent, so deceitful and reckless, so utterly unsuited for the job of Prime Minister. And yet this is where we are. Boris Johnson in charge, attempting to drive our country off a cliff just as soon as he can work out which pedal is the accelerator. But we will not let it happen. As Brighton's Peter Kyle has said, we must fight with every fibre of our beings to say between now and the 31st of October and afterwards, if there's a general election, that any terms of departure from any government must go back to the people for a final say. There should be an option to remain, and I, for one, will be out there campaigning to remain. Because, conference, we are an internationalist party. Our party, our unions and our members have always believed that we are not just stronger as part of an international movement, but we have a responsibility to lead that international movement. And indeed, it was Nelson Mandela who said on this very stage, 19 years ago this week, that Labour's historic mission as a party is to be the keepers of our brothers and sisters around the world. And I'm proud to stand here today speaking on behalf of my good friends Nia Griffiths and Dan Carden, on behalf of my wonderful Shadow Foreign Office team, Liz McInnes, Helen Goodman, Fabian Hamilton, Ray Collins, Khalid Mahmood, and my wonderful campaigning PPS, Alex Sobel. All of us speaking in support of Jeremy Corbyn, my friend, my neighbour, and our next Prime Minister. And I want to salute Nia and her team of Wayne David, Gerald Jones and Dennis Tunnicliffe, for all the work that they have done to uphold the pledges to NATO, to fight for our steel industry and stop military outsourcing, to guarantee our armed forces get fair pay, decent housing, better support for their children and a proper say in how the forces are run, and to ensure that our veterans are not sleeping in the streets, but receive free education, new career opportunities, and proper help with mental health issues. Because Boris Johnson can wrap himself in as many flags as he wants, but true patriotism is standing up for our soldiers and our veterans, and that is what Nia and her team do every day. Thank you. And I want to salute Dan Carden and his team as well. Preet Gill, Alex Norris, and the great multitasker that is Ray Collins, for continuing the work of our brilliant friend Kate Ossamore and standing up for the wonderful charities, including the RNLI, who understand that a life is a life, whoever you are. And they dedicate themselves to helping the most vulnerable people abroad, even when the right-wing media criticise them for doing so. And under Dan's leadership, we will ensure that the overseas aid budget is used to support those charities, to support the poorest people in the world, including through a new unit of public services within DFID, which will help developing countries stand on their own 2 feet, strengthen their infrastructure, healthcare and education, and help governments in those countries give their citizens the public services they need. Because just as Labour will build a Britain that works for the many, not the few, we must do the same overseas. And as Dan has made clear, we will maintain our pledges on spending, continue to pursue solidarity and global justice, and keep up our fight against global poverty, inequality, and most importantly, climate change. Because when we think about Nelson Mandela's instruction to us to be the keepers of our brothers and sisters across the world, we need to imagine what that great old man would be saying to us today. The same thing a great young woman, Greta Thunberg, has been saying to the world for months, which is the first and foremost that we must be the keepers of our planet. And we must dedicate ourselves not just to inspire a green industrial revolution in this country, but to work with every single country in the world to help them harvest the clean energy naturally available to them. Solar power, wind power, tidal power, or hydropower, and let every country become a world leader and a job creator in the technology that best suits them. Back in February, I called this the globalization of the Green New Deal, so that not just Britain, but every country can become a zero-carbon economy. And I believe it is our historic mission in this century to lead that effort and lead that fight before we reach the point of no return. And let's be clear, comrades, we desperately need that leadership in the world. Country by country, election by election is being consumed by the resurgence of the so-called strongman politics. Putin killing with impunity from Syria to Salisbury, Maduro plunging Venezuela into ever deeper division and misery, Bolsonaro hailing Brazil's military junta as a golden age, Duterte boasting about killing Filipino street children, Netanyahu trying to turn Israel into an apartheid state. Khomeini jailing innocent women in Iran as diplomatic bargaining chips. Assad, Erdogan, Orban, Sisi, the list goes on and on. And wherever we see these strongman politicians, we see the same patterns coming up. A nationalism that trades in lies, hatred and fear. A nationalism not defined by love of their country and all of its people, but by the demonization of outsiders and an attempt to divide their country's population into us and them, where them can be anyone. Immigrants, minorities, the LGBT+ community, or the politicians and journalists who stand up for them. And it should shame us in this country that these issues are all too prevalent in our own Commonwealth of Nations. How can it be that we have a Commonwealth member, India, revoking 70 years of constitutional protections for the Kashmiri people. How can it be that we have a Commonwealth member, Cameroon, slaughtering babies as part of their war on the Anglophone community? And how can it be, Conference, that we have a Commonwealth member, Brunei, passing laws to stone same-sex couples to death, and in none of these cases does the Commonwealth say a single word of collective criticism? The Conference, is it any wonder that we are seeing this rise in strongman politics when the daddy of them all, their hero, their mentor, their friend, is sitting in the White House, the so-called leader of the free world, Donald Trump? Well, I'll ask you, Conference, how can you lead a free world when you are locking toddlers in cages? How can you lead a free world when you're trying to take away the freedom of women to control their own bodies? How can you lead a free world when you are actively supporting the suppression and annexation of Palestine? Donald Trump is not the leader of the free world. He is the role model, the guiding light for all those strong man politicians across the world who are trying to tear freedom apart. And I'll tell you this, no one has taken more inspiration from him than the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. You know, I asked the question when he visited the UK last year, why on earth are they rolling out the red carpet for bin Salman? Well, now we know why. It was the only way to cover up the blood that is dripping from his hands from the murder of Jamal Khashoggi and the slaughter of thousands of innocent civilians in Yemen. Next week, on the day Boris Johnson makes his conference speech, it will be exactly 1 year since Jamal Khashoggi was butchered inside the Saudi embassy in Istanbul. 12 years on, and still, this Tory government will not say who it believes was responsible. Because, they say, the Saudi government's still investigating. But amid all the acres of news coverage that followed the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the most important sentence I read was from Dr. Meki Mada. She works in a health clinic in northern Yemen. She's been trying to help dozens of children starving and dying all around her every day. And she said this: "We're surprised the Khashoggi case is getting so much attention, while millions of Yemeni children are suffering and nobody gives a damn about them." And she said those words sitting by the bed of a 7-year-old little girl called Amal Hussein. She was stroking her hair, I remember, and the images of that little girl's emaciated body shocked the world, and that little girl died a week later. And yes, we can cry tears for Amal and all the other children who have died in Yemen and in Syria, in Cameroon and South Sudan, in Myanmar and in Gaza. But I tell you this, Conference, I'm sick and tired of sorrow. I'm sick and tired of crying over what happens one month only to see it even worse the next. Because those children need more than our sympathy and our tears. They need our action. They need our protection. And we cannot call ourselves the keepers of those children unless we are out there demanding it. The age of impunity needs to end. The age of strongman politics needs to end. And yes, there are signs of hope. Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, Cyril Ramaphosa in South Africa, Antti Rinne in Finland, Abiy Ahmed in Ethiopia, and a whole generation of progressive men and women who are shaking up American politics and putting the fear of God in Donald Trump. But we need to do more. More to stop the hate-filled rhetoric that poisons our domestic and global politics. More to stop the reckless lurch towards military action as the only way to resolve international disputes. And more to stop the irresponsible sale of arms to countries who use them to kill civilians. And while Labour in government will take immediate steps on the sale of arms for use in Yemen and in Gaza, we will also do what I promised 2 years ago on this stage, and what Brighton's Lloyd Russell Moyle has fought for so tirelessly. And conduct a root and branch reform of our arms export regime, to ensure that never again can ministers turn a blind eye when British-made weapons are being used to kill innocent children. And we will never again put strategic alliances with monsters like bin Salman before our responsibility to uphold human rights and protect the lives of our brothers and sisters across the world. But, Conference, we must also state as a fundamental principle that it is not just our role as a party to fight against injustices that we see today, but we must also correct the injustices of the past. And that is why we have committed to issue a formal apology for the first Amritsar massacre. And to hold a public review into Britain's role in the second Amritsar massacre. And that is why we have committed to allow the people of the Chagos Islands and their descendants the right of return from the lands from which they should never have been removed. And that is why we have committed to establish a judge-led inquiry into our country's alleged past complicity into rendition and torture and into the current operation of our secret courts. But when we are in government, I have agreed with Jeremy, John, Nia and Dan that we must also correct two other great injustices from our country's past. First, we will ensure that surviving Black, African, Asian and Caribbean soldiers who fought to free the world from fascism finally get the same deep mob payments that were given to their white counterparts. They fought at the same rank and in the same regiments, and they put their lives on the line for our freedom. They watched their comrades die, but then they faced the insult, the indignity of being paid a different rate when they went home, simply because of the colour of their skin. In government, I am proud to announce that we will correct that injustice. And Conference, there's another group of military veterans to whom we owe a huge debt. The men who from the 1950s onwards who were exposed to terrible levels of radiation when overseeing Britain's nuclear tests, and who have not just seen their own health damaged as a result, but most painfully, their children and their grandchildren too. Both the US and France have given large lump sum payments to some of their own nuclear test veterans to help them cope with their medical problems. But the next Labour government will go further than either of those countries. We will give a £50,000 lump sum payment to every surviving test veteran to help them and their families cope with their medical problems and give them the security and comfort they deserve in their old age. And let me thank the British Nuclear Test Veterans Association, the Mirror newspaper, and the journalist Susie Boniface in particular for fighting so hard and so long to win justice for those brave service people. That is campaigning journalist at its best. Thank you. Yes, 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 stand up. They're shy. So in conclusion, conference, if it is our mission to be the keepers of our brothers and sisters around the world, let me tell you what we must keep doing now. We must keep campaigning against climate change. And even when others are letting their forests burn, we must keep supporting all the brave men and women who fight for our country and the brave overseas aid workers who make our country so proud. And we must keep fighting to defeat the strongman politicians and hold them properly to account for their crimes. And we must keep standing up for every persecuted minority in our own country and around the world. We must keep working tirelessly for peace, even when others are chomping at the bit for war. And we must keep challenging the injustices of the present and correcting the injustices of the past. And with your endorsement today, conference, and with the instructions I hope you give us today, I believe that we must strive night and day, whatever it takes, to keep Britain in the European Union. But I believe, above all those things, conference, we must keep our eyes on the prize. We must keep our unity and our discipline. We must keep focused on getting Labour back into power. Because as Nelson Mandela told us on this stage, we are the keepers, and we must keep fighting until we win. Thank you.